Governor Pritzker, welcome back to Pod Save America.
Great to see you, John.
I'm glad to see that you're not in jail, despite the president's best wishes to the contrary. He and Kristi Noem were just in a cabinet meeting today. They said that the reason you're pushing back on the guard deployment is because you're scared and threatened by the anarchists and the politics of doing the right thing. Care to respond?
Yeah, often when the president and his minions say anything, it's really a reflection of how they're feeling. They're just projecting on other people. So I would just say the same right back at them. I think they're afraid. And frankly, I don't think they really understand the implications of what they're doing, some of them. And certainly Kristi Noem has absolutely no idea what law enforcement really means, and she's the head of Homeland Security.
How does it feel when you see the president of the United States say that you should be in jail? Like, what was your reaction to that?
Well, it's never happened to me before.
I was going to say, yeah.
Oh, it's a new feeling, whatever it is. Look, the thing is, we've heard Donald Trump speak about things he knows nothing about, and often makes crazy assertions. And I mean, over time, I guess we've all become a little bit deafened to the idea that he actually means anything, because from one moment to the other, he says things that he will then change. 5 minutes later, he knows he's lying. So you don't exactly know which one is a lie, which one is a feeling, which one is something he's actually going to act on. So it's, to my mind anyway, all I can say is the rhetoric itself is dangerous. There's no basis upon which to come after me or the mayor of Chicago or Gavin Newsom. I know that he's talked about jailing him, or any other elected officials that I know of that he's mentioned that are just speaking out. And look, he hates everyone on the left. He hates any critic of his. And so I'm a critic. I'm going to get criticism. I don't think that it's going to have any real impact. And so I kind of thumb my nose at the guy because I just don't think that he's a serious individual. By the way, the rest of the world knows that he is not a serious individual. He's got a lot of power, and I know that too. But, as if the guy says something on a day and means it, you can't take that for granted.
So he and Noem continue to describe Chicago as some kind of a crime-ridden, lawless hellhole where, brave ICE agents are being assaulted by anarchists. For people who aren't in Chicago, who have only seen headlines and posts here and there, what's the situation on the ground right now?
Well, day before yesterday, Condé Nast named us the best big city in America. So let's start with that.
Look, I love Chicago. It was one of the best places I've ever lived.
Thank you. And I have to say, we've had truly an amazing summer. And I would point out we've had a greater tourism than ever before in the history of Chicago and in the state of Illinois. So the idea that people are, continuing to come to Chicago to visit us, and yet somehow it's a hellhole and crime-ridden, and people are wearing flak jackets, and murders are happening right and left around you, it's ludicrous. And now, I recognize we're a big city. We've had crime in the past. I think every big city's had, a wave of crime that they've had to deal with. But 4 years ago to today, half the number of homicides in the state of Illinois, in the city of Chicago, rather. The state, by the way, the state of Illinois, including the city, doesn't rank in the bottom half in terms of violent crime. We're 19th. I would like to be first, best, most, safest. That would be first. We're 19th safest.
Yep.
So, working on the rest. But the point is, everything that he's saying about Chicago and Illinois is just something that he's got drilled into his head from I don't know when. And the man doesn't read anything. He doesn't know anything except what he gets told by Stephen Miller or by Kristi Noem or by I don't know who in the White House, who have their own designs on what the world order should look like with Donald Trump as their leader.
Well, and what is going on in Chicago and outside Chicago seems to be, at least for the last several weeks, if not months, ICE agents sort of terrorizing neighborhoods. It seems like there's been like some protests around the Broadview facility outside Chicago, and now
2 blocks. Just so you know, 2 blocks.
2 blocks
of people protesting. I'm talking about on the other side of the street from the Broadview facility. 2 blocks of people. That's it. I mean, now I will also tell you that when they try to march up and down the streets, in their uniforms and with their automatic weapons, and when they go into neighborhoods and try to arrest people, people are yelling at them. There are instant protests of just neighbors who are like, what are you doing? Like, this person is my friend. He's lived here for 10 years. Why are you taking him away? People are really upset about this. And so there are kind of instant protests. But this idea that there's some sort of fires or, Antifa with masks on or running around, it's all so completely false, and it's very upsetting to me. Sorry to interrupt you, but the idea that the protests that people are talking about, there are more and more people showing up because they're getting more and more upset about what's happening, and ICE is mistreating people, including U.S. citizens. They're running up to people who are brown. You've seen the videos.
Yeah.
But I'm telling you, holding somebody who's brown and saying, I need proof of your citizenship. John, you don't carry proof of citizenship. I bet you don't.
No, I do not. I do not.
I don't. We have a driver's license. That's not proof of citizenship. And we've never had to do that in this country. And yet that is what is now being demanded, or you will be detained and possibly arrested.
And now the Guard has been deployed, and he's federalized the Illinois National Guard, and Texas has sent 200 troops. What is the status of that? I know that there was a court hearing today. Probably there may be a ruling by the time you're all hearing this. But what's the status of the Guard right now?
Well, I think 2 things. One is that they've also deployed California National Guard to Illinois. That's news, by the way. I don't think anybody else knows that yet. There are 14 of them so far from California, we found out today. The hearing that you're talking about has been going on since earlier this afternoon. They took a little break in the middle because I think that the feds needed to get some information demanded by the judge to present to them. But they're coming back in about an hour and a half from now, and we're expecting that there will be a ruling, but it's hard to tell.
Have you spoken to Greg Abbott at all since the deployment of the Texas National Guard to Illinois?
No, he has not called me. And Greg Abbott, I want to remind you, is the same Greg Abbott who signed a letter last year to President Biden saying, do not federalize our National Guard for the purposes of using them with Space Force, that you should have very limited authority to call our National Guard, the Texas National Guard, into service for the federal government's purposes. And therefore, that's what his view was a year ago when there was a Democratic president. Seems like things have changed a year later. All of a sudden, he thinks it's just fine to federalize his National Guard, to send them to another state, or to have the government, the federal government, and the president do whatever they want with them.
You said earlier this week that this is all a pretext for Trump to invoke the Insurrection Act, which, I think he probably has fewer limits legally on that if he invokes the Insurrection Act than even the deployment of the Guard. But how would that look different than what's happening right now? What should people know about that?
So, we're going to get into some legal matters that, although I'm an attorney, I would say I mostly play one on TV these days. But I can say this, that the Insurrection Act, let's start with, it's called the Insurrection Act for a reason.
Needs to be an insurrection.
Yeah, or a foreign invasion. We have an invasion going on in Chicago. It is by federal agents at the moment, and potentially by federal troops, or federalized troops. But the Insurrection Act really can only be invoked in those circumstances. Truly, a foreign invasion, an insurrection, those are basically the circumstances, or something that is truly a national emergency. So he legally can't invoke the Insurrection Act. I know, again, He woke up this morning with a new idea, or yesterday morning. So he's saying it. Meanwhile, we have to rely upon the courts to protect us from a president just saying things and then doing it, even though it's unconstitutionally illegal. How would it look different? Well, to be honest with you, it would look different in the sense that today in court, the federal lawyers are saying that the reason they want to bring in National Guard is to protect the facilities of ICE and the ICE agents. Insurrection. They're not saying, the federal lawyers are not saying this is about crime,
right?
Which is what Donald Trump continues to say, despite the fact that the lawyers for the federal government are arguing something completely different. So why are they sending troops in? Donald Trump is telling them to, and they're coming up with any argument that will work. The Insurrection Act, the difference between the current situation and Insurrection Act invocation is that the Insurrection Act would essentially allow those troops to repel the foreign invasion or to put down the insurrection. And that could be done in a lot of different ways, including something that would look like crime fighting or something that would look like martial law. Because it would be war. I mean, that's the purpose of an Insurrection Act, right? To put down rebellion or to push back on foreign invasion. So that'd be very different, but it only gets triggered under those very limited circumstances, which don't exist, and they don't exist anywhere in this country, even if you picked the worst, most crime-ridden city, which Chicago is not nearly. Even if you pick that city, that would not trigger, my understanding as an attorney and as someone who's talked to a lot of attorneys recently about this, would not trigger the Insurrection Act.
So you guys have taken legal action on the Guard deployments. What other options are you considering to help protect the people of Illinois from ICE terrorizing the neighborhoods, from everything else that Donald Trump is trying to do to Illinois and Chicago specifically? Like, I'm sure you get up every day and your highest priority is to protect people in your state. And this is obviously a pretty extreme situation that it seems like Donald Trump wants to escalate even further. So do you have other options or other tools that you can consider?
Look, there are limits on the power of states to overcome what the federal government is attempting to do. So I believe me, starting on November the 8th, we began looking at all of the things that we thought Donald Trump was capable of doing and trying to think through how we could respond, what all of the available responses are. And still, there are things we didn't imagine, that are happening. And so we have to think it through constantly. And thank God we've got a great attorney general. I've got a great general counsel in my office and terrific outside counsels that help us as well, not to mention our teams. And they're basically a bunch of things that we've been doing. And I've sometimes talked about, Trump-proofing our state. So we've passed laws that have done things to protect people in our neighborhoods. Again, not knowing exactly what was going to happen, ice on the ground for persistent, months. But here are some things that we're doing and will continue to do. And then, of course, there are things we can contemplate. One is we funded something that's, I guess we're all calling rapid reaction, which is local nonprofit organizations that when ICE comes into a neighborhood, they are texted or called by people in the neighborhood. Everybody knows how to get a hold of them in the neighborhoods where we think they're most targeted, and those folks come in from wherever they are nearby. It's they know who's nearby and they come as fast as they can. And the idea is not to interfere with ICE because you're not allowed. It's not legal to stand in the way of a law enforcement officer of federal government or state. But rather to make sure that people in the neighborhood generally are warned what's going on, and also to help out people who are being ill affected. There's a family, I'll just take an example, a family where maybe there's a mixed status family where one person is undocumented and another person is perhaps partially documented, and another person yet still is a U.S. citizen. And ICE will come in, detain them all because they all look alike and nobody has proof on them of their status. And then, after perhaps an hour, they will have detained them in a car or perhaps remove them to another place. And then they'll let the U.S. citizen go, what have you. But the Rapid Reaction Force is there to assist. What about the children that are there? What about the grandma who's not being arrested, but she's now left by herself? And the neighborhood is traumatized. One other thing, remember that we've got, real trauma going on where you've got children at elementary schools nearby they don't know. We all talk about whether a parent can, walk their child to school because they might get stopped by ICE. And that's one problem. Another is the children at the school are traumatized by the idea, even now, that they don't know if they go home, if anybody's going to be home when they get there. And so this is the world, this is the country, the city that we're living in, the country that we're living in where that can happen. So we're Rapid Reaction Forces there to assist people in the neighborhoods. We've got Illinois State Police that are working with local law enforcement in Broadview. That's a separate suburb. It's not Chicago. And it's a very small police department there. We're working with them, and we've brought in the Cook County Sheriff's Office to protect the protesters who, as you've seen in some of the videos, they're getting pelted with, gas pellets, with rubber bullets, even when they're not doing anything wrong. I think everybody now has seen the pastor just standing there praying with his arms wide open and getting pelted. So we're doing things to protect people on the ground as best we can. We've advised ICE that they're doing it wrong, and and explaining that they should be coordinating and talking to us about where they're going, what they're doing, not because we're going to assist them or anything like that, but rather because we want to make sure that there isn't any misunderstanding or isn't any protest that gets out of hand in any particular location. That's what we would like, but they have done no communication with us.
Wow.
Okay, so you asked me, what are we doing? So the rest of it is people knowing their rights. They're not allowed to break down your door if they do not have a judicial warrant. And they almost never have a judicial warrant. Now, the building, the South Shore building
Right.
that you're probably well aware of that was, essentially taken over like a war zone, and under the guise that it was some headquarters of Tren de Aragua. What happened there, they gave us no notice. They gave nobody in the building notice. Okay, they have to go get somebody. They had, as I understand it, they had judicial warrant on perhaps a few, 2, 3 Tren de Aragua members. Instead of going after them, and we all understand police, if you can isolate the apartment or area of a building, they're going to go there and they're going to isolate it and make sure that people are safe who they're not looking at. Instead, they literally went into this building like they were in a Fallujah, and rappelling off of Black Hawk helicopters, they ransacked the entire place. Doors are broken, windows are broken. They kept people, innocent U.S. citizens and people who are documented, they kept them detained for hours, some of them zip-tied, while they went and got the few people that they were going after. And look, I want them to get the bad guys. Please understand. I just like I want our police and the FBI and DEA, I want them to go after gang members, whether they're Tren de Aragua or anything else. But for God's sakes, the innocent people whose lives have been upended, the trauma that the children have gone through, that shouldn't be allowed in this country. And whether they are given immunity by the President of the United States, they are going to be held accountable when there is a change in administration. They are. When there is a Democrat in office, or when the Congress takes over, the Democratic Congress takes over and actually does something, they're going to hold hearings. People are going to be held accountable, and they could be held accountable legally. And it might take a few years, which is not at all satisfying to any of us. But the people who are doing this on the ground need to know that they may feel safe now because the president and Kristi Noem and Tom Homan say it's okay. But trust me, a few years from now, this is going to hurt.
I mean, you mentioned Congress. So Democrats in Congress have made the government shutdown about health care. They won't vote to fund the government unless Trump and Republicans agree to reverse health care cuts that will lead to huge premium spikes for millions, as well as people losing their health care. I think this is a worthy fight, both on the substance. I think it's going to help people if they win, and I think it's good politically. I also think that they should be saying they won't fund the government unless Trump and Republicans agree to some basic restrictions on ICE. And, a federal judge in Illinois, just before we started talking, just imposed temporary restrictions that, prevent ICE from using force or arresting journalists or nonviolent protesters, or unless there's probable cause they've committed a crime. They also prevent ICE from using riot control weapons and throwing people to the ground unless there's an imminent risk of public safety. Do you think the Democrats in Congress should be demanding reforms like these around ICE? We could name a few more as a condition for funding the government.
Look, I think we should be demanding those things, but I also think that you've got to have some strategy about getting to the end of a shutdown. And so getting real results so that you can get to the end of a shutdown. And I believe strongly that what you just described is something that I've talked about with some senators and congressmen before the shutdown took place. What should the strategy be? What should you be going after? I think we should be fighting for, as you just said, like both sides of that, right? Healthcare and, I guess I'll just proudly say, democracy.
Yeah.
But I do think that it's very difficult to get actual guarantees from a federal administration, especially one that's being given carte blanche by the Supreme Court, and as if they have ultimate executive power with very few limitations. It's hard to get any agreement from them that will hold.
Yeah.
But what you can do is get a piece of legislation that says, we're going to give people or preserve people's health care and make sure that they're not dying because they don't have health care coverage or that their premiums will be doubled. So I think there's a limit to what you can demand, because otherwise, why not just put everything on the table and say we're not opening up the government until we get all of these things. So I think, again, I am not suggesting that we shouldn't be very, very vocal and fight very hard to make sure that we're limiting what ICE and CBP are doing. But I think there's just a limit to what can be done by Congress right now. And this is actually, because you raise it, I'll just tell you, it's why I think that governors are so important in this moment. And I know that sounds self-serving, but I just am saying that governors, whether it's Gavin Newsom or, Maura Healey or Michelle Lujan Grisham, we don't talk about all those folks all the time, but governors have the ability to get things done, and we have. I mean, Tim Walz, I was just in Minnesota with him. Boy, look at the things he's gotten done, and even with a divided, 50-50 legislature.
Yeah.
But in Washington, I mean, it's so little gets done that's positive for the American people, and I think that it's a little bit like we need to look back to the states. We banned, prior authorizations for mental health, for example. We've expanded healthcare in a massive way since I've been governor. We raised the minimum wage, $15 here now from $8.25 when I took office. Just all of those things are things we got done at the state level that really do help people, while the federal government is kind of like either hurting or just sitting silent and neutral and getting nothing done. It's a sad state of affairs in the country, and I do think the 2026 elections are going to be vital for determining which direction we're really going to go.
For sure. And you've warned a few times now that Trump might use the military in connection with the 2026 elections. What specifically are you worried about, and what do you think can be done about it?
Well, I think we're seeing something very unusual, and I guess I'm going to piece a few things together for you just to make the point. So we're seeing the agents themselves dressed as soldiers marching in a major city, in several major cities, causing mayhem and hoping to bring in more soldiers, right? These folks, nobody knows the difference between somebody wearing camouflage and holding an automatic weapon who happens to be an ICE agent and someone who's doing this, wearing the same thing, who's a soldier. So the normalization of that is what I think their aim is. And, they keep expanding more cities, right? It's easier to do it in a red state, even in a blue city, but a red state, than it is in a blue state. But that's, so you're seeing them do it in blue states and red states. Now, that's one thing that's happening, the normalization and militarization of cities. Another thing that's happened, and very few people paying attention, you probably are, which is they demanded, the DOJ did, our voter data. Not just ours in Illinois, every state's voter data. Why? They won't tell us why. And actually, what they seem to be looking for, remember back to the 2020 elections, is they want to be able to find voter fraud, which lots of organizations have been looking for voter fraud, as you know, for a long time. There's very little voter fraud going on, very little. They're calling for all these databases so that they can look through them, and yet they won't tell you when they're going to come up with any conclusion about whatever it is they're looking for. Next year, when we have a November election, I think you're going to see two things that occur. One, you won't have had any results from this mass collection of data, of voter data. And then the second is you're going to have soldiers or people dressed as soldiers at polling places saying, we're protecting your voting rights. This is about voter integrity. And then the possibility that they'll be doing what Michael Flynn urged the president to do back in 2020, which is seize the ballot boxes at the polling places so that we can have the military do a fair count. Now, if you put all the things together that are happening right now, that wouldn't surprise me at all. Think about how hard they fought on this issue of whether the election had been stolen in 2020, right? The January 6th riot being an example of that, but lots of other things. And then all of those people at January 6th, being pardoned. All of that, put all those together and ask yourself, do you think what I just said is completely ridiculous? Do you think what I just said is something that's really possible with Trump as president and Stephen Miller in the White House and all the same people kind of advising the president that are at the edges of the law?
I think it's definitely possible. It doesn't sound that far-fetched. I think my concern is, A, so what do we do about that? And B, it's like, I'm sure you walk this fine line all the time, which is we want to warn people like, hey, wake up, this is happening, or this could happen, but also you don't want to scare people into staying home and depressing turnout, right? And so how do you think about like the way to handle that this could be coming in 2026?
They're the ones who want to scare people to stay home, right? That's the purpose of having troops. So that's one of the purposes. But look, I think we've just got to make it plain to people that now is a moment when you're going to have to, choose to are you going to just let democracy go? And I might remind you, because I know you're a political being, as any elected official is too, this is not how we win elections. Like talking about democracy, I was not a fan of what Joe Biden did at that Valley Forge. I thought it was a great speech he gave at Valley Forge in January of 2024. But I didn't go, in part because I didn't think that should not be the theme of a campaign, and that's what he was trying to make it. And because I don't think democracy is the issue on which you win. I do think that you can't win unless you have democracy. So those of us who have any power to do anything about it need to stand up and speak out about the danger of losing democracy. And then we've also got to run campaigns all across the United States. I'm running for re-election, but the Congress in particular, we've got to make sure that we're running campaigns about things that really matter in everybody's life. I'll tell you a quick story, if I can, about something that happened to me when I was working on Capitol Hill. I worked for 2 United States senators many years ago in my 20s. I got offered the opportunity to go with this organization you may have heard of called the American Council of Young Political Leaders to a foreign country with, half Democrats, half Republicans, young people like me at the time, where we learned about we got sent to Argentina to learn about their political system, and they would bring people from other countries to learn about ours. We went there, we landed in Buenos Aires, and the minute we landed, strangely, there was a military coup. I promise I had nothing to do with it. And so we went to the hotel, all of us together, and watched on TV what was happening. And then we had to make a decision, or at least the leader of our group said we have to make a decision. Are we going to go to the embassy and wait it out, or are we going to go? There's going to be a democracy rally the next day in the Plaza de Mayo in Buenos Aires. Should we go there to learn about democracy, in person in this situation? And by the way, the vote was basically half and half. The Republicans all wanted to go to the embassy. The Democrats all wanted to go to the democracy rally. We went to the democracy rally, the tiebreaker being the leader of the group, and we got to see hundreds of thousands of people carrying banners and talking about democracy, yelling, chanting, and so on. And there was a guy in the middle of all of that with an ice cream cart, selling popsicles and ice cream. And I remember that vividly. I'm 60 years old now. I was 23 at the time. I still remember it vividly because I remember thinking at the time and talking to a few of the people I was with about the fact that that guy doesn't mostly care about what the form of government is. What he cares about is he's got to put food on it. That's the number one consideration, is the food on the table, right? He's got to put gas in his car. He's got to survive. And I think about that now, thinking about our elections coming up next year, that the number one issue in people's lives is, can I put food on the table, get to work? Can I feed my family or take care of them and have a home to live in? And the number two issue is, the form of government. Yeah. And so we've got to win elections on number one. And then we've also got to fight for number two in order to have the elections.
Governor Pritzker, well said. And thank you, as always, for joining Pod Save America.
Thanks, John.
Take care.